Hello everyone, it's me here, and today I have 5 interesting, curious facts about the end of World War II in Europe. And this is part of my series covering various anniversaries from World War II. If you enjoy this video, please subscribe so that you don't miss out on future videos. Curiosity number 1, the German surrender was signed twice. First, it was signed in Reims, France on May 7, 1945. That's when German General Alfred Jodl signed the document of surrender in Reims. But then a few hours later, the news came through that the Red Army had captured Berlin. And after more fighting between the Germans and the Soviets, the second surrender was done in Berlin. It was signed by Grand Admiral Karl Donot, who was Hitler's successor. So why did they need to sign it again? Well, partly it was because Stalin wanted the German leaders to admit that they had attacked the Soviet Union first. But also, it was really important for Stalin to be involved in any peace deal or agreement, as he had suffered the most losses out of any of the Allies. And the fact that his troops had entered Berlin and taken Hitler's bunker showed the world that he was very powerful. The two versions of the surrender were basically the same, but some historians believe that Stalin forced Germany to admit that they started the war. And that is what the second version of the surrender says. It is true that Germany and Hitler blamed the Soviet Union for starting the war. In a way, though, they can also blame themselves. You see, there was an agreement between Germany and the Soviet Union not to attack each other. But this was broken by Hitler in June 1941, when he invaded the Soviet Union. But this might not have happened if it wasn't for Stalin, as he and Hitler had met several times before the war, and they had discussed things that were not going well for them, such as how much power they would both have in Europe. They both thought that they needed more land, Hitler needing to expand into the east, and Stalin needing to keep the peace in his area. But what was good for both of them was to take some of Poland's territory. And this is what they agreed upon. So in a way, they are both responsible for starting the war. The Germans took half of Poland and the Soviets took the other half. And then Hitler decided to take the rest of Poland just a year later. This made Stalin angry, and he was now ready to go to war with the Germans. I think that Stalin wanted to be involved in the peace talks because he didn't want the situation to get out of control. He knew that there would be another war, and so he thought that if he talked to Hitler, they could avoid another war, at least for a while. But clearly, it didn't work out that way. Fact number 2, when the news broke out that Germany had surrendered, crowds gathered outside of Buckingham Palace. They shouted, "We want the king, we want the king," and eventually the king and the entire British royal family appeared on the balcony. There were 3 balconies at Buckingham Palace, and all 3 were used by the royal family. The king waved his sword, which was probably an old one, as well as Queen Elizabeth, who was the current queen until recently, waved her arms in the air. But she wasn't the only Elizabeth to appear on the balcony. Her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was also there, and she waved a white handkerchief. She was quite famous for doing that during tough times for the British people, such as during the war and especially during the Blitz. Other members of the royal family that appeared on the balcony were Princesses Margaret and Mary, as well as Prince George. George was the son of the then Prince George, who was the eldest son of the king. This means that young George was the grandson of the king and the future king of England. He was only 3 years old at the time, but he was waving from the balcony alongside his parents. What is fascinating about this is that while the crowds were waiting for the king to appear on the balcony, they thought that they would be alone. Instead, the whole family came out, and the crowds went wild. This must have been an incredible sight to behold. While there is only one photograph, I imagine that the scene would have looked something like this. There were many photographs of the royal family at the time, so this isn't too far off, but I'm sure the actual event was even more special. Of course, the next day, the royal family was back on the balcony to wave to the crowds once more. Fact number 3, more than 70 million people fought in World War II. That is a huge number of people, especially considering that this was before computers, modern medicines, and even cars were common around the world. Imagine having to collect millions of people into one place and then send them to war. This was done by trains. The Soviets had 250,000 railway cars and 100,000 locomotives to transport soldiers and equipment. At one point, the Germans had more than 500,000 men fighting in Russia. I can't imagine the chaos that would ensue trying to move that many people in the countryside. Not only were the numbers of those fighting massive, but the number of deaths was also enormous. According to data collected by the National World War II Museum, the Soviet Union lost 7.5 million military personnel during the war. And that's just military personnel, not civilians. That's almost 10 times more than the United Kingdom lost during the war, and 16 times more than what the United States lost. While the war is considered to have ended on May 8, 1945, for the Soviet Union, the war didn't end until September of 1945. That is when Japan surrendered after the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Fact number 4, during the war, things got so bad that Reims, the city where the Germans surrendered, was nearly completely destroyed. The city was in ruins. Most of the buildings had been destroyed, and the streets were full of rubble. Then, 1 year later, the city was liberated, but it was still in ruins. It wasn't until 1949 that the city began to rebuild itself. After the war, Reims was chosen as the place where the German generals would sign the surrender papers. This meant that the city got some international attention, and the French government was keen on rebuilding it quickly. But it still wasn't easy. There was a lot of damage to repair, and many people had lost their homes and their businesses. It took many years for Reims to return to normal, but today it is a beautiful city once again. Fact number 5. During the war, beer was a rare treat. So when the war ended, everyone celebrated with beer. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any pictures of the king drinking beer, but I did find some pictures of people drinking beer in the streets. The thing is that during the war, beer was rationed, so it was hard to get. People had to have special permission to buy it. This made the beer more special, and so when the war ended, everyone wanted to celebrate with beer. That's why you see people drinking beer from cans in the streets. They were probably celebrating with friends and family. Also, let's be honest, drinking beer from cans is easier than carrying bottles. But it wasn't just people drinking beer in the streets. There were also trucks loaded with beer rolling through the streets. This was probably because the beer was being transported from the brewery to the pubs. People probably didn't know how much beer they would need, so they sent the trucks to the city center to be distributed. I found a picture of a truck filled with beer cans in Piccadilly Circus. This is a famous place in London, and it was probably chosen because it was a central place where everyone could see the truck. It was also probably chosen because it was a place where people could gather and drink beer. Overall, it seems like the end of the war was a very joyous occasion, and the beer was an important part of the celebrations. Those are 5 curious facts about the end of World War II in Europe. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a comment and subscribe. Remember to stay tuned for more content, and I'll see you in the next one.